good morning or good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you are currently at, maybe even good evening to some of you. Welcome to the Hot Politics Lab penultimate meeting of the year, the dreadful year 2020, but we're keeping up the good hopes. We have a, I must say, very special guest tonight. Sorry, I'm so dark outside. This afternoon for me. Patrick Stewart from the University of Arkansas. For you, it's morning. Have you had breakfast yet, Patrick?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
I'm very happy to have Patrick as a speaker because in a way he embodies a lot of the topics, but also the spirit of the Hot Politics Lab. I think Patrick is by far one of the most creative researchers in political science, while a lot of us work on institutions like, I don't know, electoral systems, party organizations. Patrick works on smiles, audience responses. I mean, these are really creative topics, and they've led to a ton of interesting research that you can read about in journals like PLOS ONE, Political Psychology, Motivation and Emotion, and also, let's not forget it, the International Journal of Humor Research. Must say I've never read that, but but this sounds really fascinating. Patrick is also on this. I think is really special. A certified facial action coding system. Well, not sure how familiar each of you are with facts, but you know that's a lot of work to do. So I'm really impressed that that you're maybe probably the only political scientist with that certificate. So Patrick is at the University of Arkansas as an associate professor. He's also the chair of the Association for Politics and the Life Sciences, which I think under his chairmanship has become a very visible and interesting organization to be part of. He's joined today by Carl Senior. He's a co-author on the paper, right? And Carl is from the what was it? Aston University in Birmingham, UK.
That's correct. Yes.
Without spending more time, I will give you the floor, Patrick.
Okay, well, first of all, I really need to thank you all for this invitation. Bert, Heath, thank you so much. I also have to thank Micah and Christian for making this possible. Every Friday morning, I have watched Hot Politics. Last few weeks, I haven't been able to. They have helped me work through the Zoom issues. And now I'm here, and I appreciate this opportunity because this has presented me with research from some incredible scholars at different points of their careers. And I hope that what I present will provide a little bit of insight as how my career has evolved, as well as where things are going with the research that Carl and I are doing. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and share that screen. And let's go to desktop. And how does that look for y'all? Thumbs up? Okay, good deal. The title of this has changed because, well, life has changed since the beginning of the fall semester when this was set up. Essentially, the presentation today is going to be three parts. The first part is going to be discussing understanding the receiver by moving beyond traditional emotion models. Now, I'm not saying that the circumplex, the basic emotions model, these models are all done with and it's time to move on. What I am saying is that when you look at the micro level of analysis, when you're looking at frame by frame analysis, a different approach shows itself and allows for maybe greater insights into what is going on, especially because we are all dealing with the issue of the inside out of affect and how the outside in of the linguistic representations of emotion come together. And I think this model provides some really great opportunities for understanding what's going on within individuals. And it's also important politically because context plays an incredible role. So understanding the role of context is something that obviously as political scientists, political psychologists, we are very much interested in. So this componential processing model is the state of the art. It comes out of the University of Geneva. And I think what I have found most fascinating through my career is looking at those nonverbal behaviors that are reliable stimuli. In other words, they reflect the emotional state of someone, even if they fake it. So observable audience responses for me reflect that, because laughter is one of those. That's one of those key things that we as humans do, and certainly other animals do, including rats. But as far as politically, I make the argument, and I won't be making it as extensively here, but I've made it elsewhere, that observable audience response such as laughter, booing, applause, and chanting, cheering, are the initial forms of votes that we have, especially when you're dealing with small group situations. Now, moving from there, we tested this out. We tested the CPM considering observable audience response as a stimuli with a short clip from Nigel Farage's Brexit. He had a speech there, and Carl can speak to that more extensively. And then we had the opportunity this year when Joe Biden was a part of a debate where there was no audience present, so we could actually put in the audio for a self-deprecatory comment that he made. So that being said, with the organization, let's talk about where I started from. And of course, I hate to go ahead, do the it's all about me, but I think it's important for us to understand where we come from in our research. Research from the Dartmouth group really forms the foundation for the research with nonverbal behavior. And I was fortunate enough in the early 90s to attend a presentation in an auditorium by Roger Masters from Dartmouth University, or Dartmouth College. And he made a presentation where he asked us to reflect upon our emotional response to a clip from John F. Kennedy. Now, 25 years old video clip. And we're sitting in an auditorium and we're ranking our emotional states. And a couple things strikes me at this point. The first thing that struck me is that this is the very best of citizen science. This is bringing the public and scientists such as myself into the research process and asking us to take part in the studies to understand what's going on. And so that has informed how I approach science, is try to bring the public in as much as possible, whether it's participants or sharing the research, such as Hot Politics Lab does. Now, the other thing that struck me is I'm in my mid-20s watching this, and I don't know what I'm feeling. The interoception, the internal feeling, my understanding of my physiological state was not there as much as I would like, even though arguably I was beyond what my fellow students were. The introspection and this interospection was lacking. And I think this is something that we see as put in Bert Keyes and Matthias's APSR article that just came out recently. It's the whole idea of alignment and de-alignment. And so from that point forward, I was left with a conundrum of emotion, and how do we experience it, and how does it reflect our affective states? So looking at facial expressions is the understanding that when you say it's a facial expression, it's something you're expressing from your body. But as we look at the research by the Dartmouth group, they classified these emotions into different categories based upon the intent, the effect that you would have on other people. So it becomes facial display behavior. And so we move, they started looking at more at the molar level because they were dealing with primatological research. And the idea was that you had anger threats, which is more of a dominant behavior, and it's connected with a cluster of different behaviors. And you look for these clusters in a more aggregated level to understand what's going on. Fear evasion in response to that. Then you have happiness reassurance. And then from there, you also have sadness appeasement. And happiness reassurance and sadness appeasement deal with affiliation. But those of us who, I was fortunate enough to travel. And when I was traveling, I did not have the language skills. I lived in Spain for about a year, and I was terrible with the language, but I knew how to watch people. And the one thing that I picked up on is the fact that not all smiles are the same. And that's what led me to do research into smiles and to consider them using the different muscular movements in the face. So we think about smiles that involve the entire face. So orbicularis oculi, the zygomaticus muscle, and the showing of the teeth. But there's potentially a lot more going on, not just with what shows up, what muscles are used, but also the strength, but also the timing. And so I spend a lot of my time looking at political figures on a frame by frame basis, which can be seen as tedious, but I kind of enjoy this stuff. And I found that the traditional smile that was posited by the Dartmouth group, but before that by Paul Ekman and Wallace Friesen with their research, didn't show up. That there were certainly smiles that involved a jaw drop, but not the traditional pose smile, which involves all that with the teeth clenched. So that led me to look at things a little bit differently and start trying to understand what the challenge was and how to do a better job of looking at the micro level, which led me to the Componential Processing Model. Now, the Componential Processing Model of affective appraisal grew out of the intersection of human ethology and the psychological sciences. And it's really, Klaus Scherer is a driving force behind this. He's recently retired, but the Swiss Center for Affective Sciences at the University of Geneva continues to do some really incredible research with this, and it's starting to reach out to the other disciplines, including business and hopefully with what Carl and I are doing, more of political science. So it's looking the micro level approach to analyzing affect and emotion, but understanding facial displays and vocalizations, but understanding that these appraisals can be conscious or pre-conscious. And there are multiple feedback loops that are going on. So in essence, it is using a Brunswick model, lens model, to understand what's going on with emotions. So what we see here are 4 different componential levels with subject levels that are affected by different stimuli. So that leads us to, well, let's look at the face. And this is some great work by a colleague and friend of mine, Mark Mayhew. I've been fortunate enough to work with him on multiple projects where he did some really incredible work, and we'll talk about this hopefully at the very end of the presentation, some of his research that's almost a decade old, but is really important for political scientists. Is these are the action units, the movements in the face that you're looking for to appreciate where the appraisal is going. And all of them combined in different ways might lead to different emotional states in our understanding of it, our labeling of it, whether internally or externally. So the question is, what does this mean for politics? Well, one of the things that I did for this last electoral cycle was watch Donald Trump and Joe Biden do an awful lot of display behavior. And what I saw with Donald Trump and Joe Biden is that while they did not do specifically one type only, they tended to have a specialization of sorts in different behaviors. For Donald Trump, and this for me is very fascinating, he does the lip funneler, the AU18, the AU22. There's not a whole lot of research that's done with it with humans, about 2 articles. It's connected with anger, but also if you look at the pant hoot within primates, this movement right here is essentially something that we see in primates with calls dealing with bringing groups of adolescent males together in aggressive movements there. On the other hand, Joe Biden does a lot of laughing and smiling, but mainly it's the laughing off of attacks. So what we're seeing here is the individual bases for something that is a group level activity there. And so we have these bases for observable audience response that are physiologically, they take a lot of energy and they affect you. Certainly with laughter, it involves the face, and involves a vocalization, and it also involves the torso movement, which changes the physiological state. So if you start faking laughter, eventually you start feeling happy, which is why we have laughter clubs. So that is the Componential Processing Model and politics really briefly. How am I doing for time? Oh, I've got 3 minutes to get through the rest of it. Okay, so let's go into study one.
More, Patrick.
Nigel, what's that?
A bit more than that, because I also took like 3 minutes to introduce you. So.
Oh, okay, 6 minutes. Okay, so we'll go rather quickly and we'll come back to it. So we did some studies. This is Carl and I were collecting data. We took about a 1:20 clip and we looked at the idea, what can we do cross-culturally? Certainly we have United States and United Kingdom students that we're using with the first study. Political ideology is something that we see across culture as the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. That crew has done an incredible job with research in that, John Jost. A variety of individuals have looked at that. And then we have the focus, which is observable audience response, which we have multiple conditions, and we included laughter and booing together, which we'll take out in the next study for reasons of statistical power. So, hypotheses, we expect that these observable audience responses will have an effect, as will social identity and political ideology. The clip is something that we created. Carl can speak to the video itself, but it was Nigel Farage, and we'll see he looked like he gave a punchline cue non-verbally, and that's when we edited in applause, laughter, and laughter booing combination with BBC files to make it seem as appropriate as possible. So next scene, let's see if we can actually get this going.
Seem to be being corrected by the week, but if you're part of the cabinet that has seen net migration running at record levels and running at 10 times, and that's if you believe the official figures, which seem to be being corrected by the week, but if you're part of the cabinet that has seen net migration running at record levels and running at 10 times, and that's if you believe the official figures, which seem to be being corrected by the week, but if you're part of the cabinet that has seen net migration running at record levels and running at 10 times the post-war average, and that's indeed the official figures, which seem to be being corrected by the week. If you're part of the cabinet that has seen net migration running at record levels and running at 10 times, and that's if you believe the official figures, which seem to be being corrected by the week. But if you're part of the cabinet that has seen net migration running at record levels, and that's if you believe the official figures.
Come on, let's go. There we go. Okay, so we ran the study, and the idea here is we were looking at a previous study that we did. We made a guesstimate, ballpark guesstimate, which sometimes you have to do. We tried to oversample with the idea that we needed to reach out to 650 participants. We had 683. We thought, okay, we might be a little bit under. Oh boy, were we really under. We had to drop a lot of data because of individuals that either did not stay in the study long enough, or they stayed in the study too long, 15 minutes or longer, and they didn't respond to the videos themselves by writing down comments. So it dropped down to about 356 individuals. But our findings are fascinating here. We saw that, well, certainly political ideology and social identity, whether as a United Kingdom or a United States citizen, had an effect, and it varied as far as where it had an effect. It was the mid-level of pleasantness meets expectation and meets goals where we saw significant differences in response to the observable audience responses. When we looked at the data itself, we see that there's a positive effect with how pleasant this was perceived as far as for the speaker themselves, with applause and laughter, and a negative effect with booing and laughter booing, which is pretty much as expected. And it was the same thing with the meeting expectation and the meeting of goals, suggesting that was a mid-level in the componential processing approach there, is hitting that mid-level of considering the implications. So those were our findings, and going through this quickly because the next study is where things get really fascinating and maybe a little bit embarrassing. So what happened is we decided to do a study with Joe Ben, as we talked about earlier. And this time around, we said, you know what, let's pre-register our hypotheses. we know what we think we're going to find. We know the stimuli. We know that we have to bring up the numbers. And also one of my concerns, especially with the United States, is bringing in different people. And I have a lot of students who are currently staying at home, living with their parents, living with family, and they're lacking the social connections that we're all lacking that would normally be the case. So these are the hypotheses. You can go to the website and look at it, but we put ourselves out there. And the stimulus, similar. Go ahead, look at this real quickly. It's about 1 minute. Do we have enough time, Heath?
For the time being, anything can happen.
Bert, thanks.
Say, knock on wood, that I'm in good health. Number 3, I'm taking all the precautions anyone. Number 2, thank God, for the time being, anything can happen. My mother would say, knock on wood, that I'm in good health. Number 3, I'm taking all the precautions anyone. Number 2, thank God, for the time being, anything can happen. My mother would say, knock on wood, that I'm in good health. Number 3, I'm taking all the precautions anyone. Number 2, thank God, for the time being, anything can happen. My mother would say, knock on wood, that I'm in good health. Number 3, I'm taking all the precautions anyone.
Okay, so what we're saying here is, darn it. Okay. When we ran the data, the thing that stands out is, first of all, we had expected that there wouldn't be as many differences between the United Kingdom and the United States in terms of social identity. What we did not expect was a level that political ideology, how powerful a factor that would play. It's huge. And the other thing is we did not get the significant results that we expected using the null hypothesis testing approach. We did see patterns that mirrored what was the case with the previous study, with meeting expectation, meeting goals. Meeting expectations came close, meeting goals, met the 0.05 level, if you want to use that as a rule of thumb. And we'll go ahead and show the data there. But this is where things get fascinating. Actually, when it came to the appraisal, it diminished. Applause, laughter, and booing diminished response. It was seen as meeting expectation and meeting goals less so in these OAR conditions than in the control condition. And that was completely contrary to our hypotheses. We failed, right? Well, not really. Not really. We had some problems, we admit it, and this is what we're looking at for the next study. The first of all is the sample itself. The sample size wasn't as large as we had hoped. We got 700 people to enter the study. The combined was 338 that met the expectations. While reaching out and using a snowball sample is something that we find is very important, I think the one thing that we do is we rely upon the goodwill of our students and the people that they're recruiting. While we're trying to teach them by bringing them into the research process and then sharing the research with them afterwards, it still is a large component of time. 15 to 20 minutes for a survey 10, 20 years ago wasn't a problem. Nowadays, we need to cut our studies down even more, especially if we're doing it online. That's number one. Number 2, stimuli appropriateness. Certainly when you're dealing with COVID-19, the whole idea of making a joke or making a comment that can be received positively may be seen as quite inappropriate. It's something that's referred to as by Peter McGraw and Caleb Warren as in their benign violation theory of humor, too close, too soon. So the thought here is that, well, people just weren't ready to hear humor. It's not the time to use humor about COVID-19. But also as a part of this, while it looked like, especially if you look at these responses here, that laughter was not really noticed that much. Booing was noticed an awful lot. I think it's because most of our lives we're used to soundtracks that spice it up with laughter and applause. Booing, however, is not something that we hear very often. So much of those responses that I saw, actually all of them that commented on the observable audience response, said the booing was just, it seemed fake. It didn't seem like it belonged there. So lastly, ceiling effect. It's obviously something that's extremely pertinent for all of us. And as you see, there's a difference between the different studies. And so one of the things when we consider observable audience response, it's additional information that if you're working in a low information situation, such as might be the case with immigration, I think that the Hot Politics APSR piece discusses how immigration is one of those low information sorts of situations, very emotional, but it's low information. COVID-19 is something that we all deal with, and it's extremely politically divisive. So moving from there, what are the next steps? Another study. Hey, Carl, ready for it? Okay, so I think waiting until fall of 2021 is probably the best bet, because we will see if it is too close too soon with the humor. And we'll also make sure that we do a shorter study without all those added on extra questions. That's my fault for putting them on there. And we'll just focus on some very simple things. So it's going to be shorter. But the next thing is consider the facial expression analysis tools. I'll have to go ahead and basically admit it. I'm really cheap with my research. I've taught most of my career at teaching institutions, which means there isn't research money, which means that I use what is at hand. The facial expression analysis tools are expensive. $20,000 for face reader and core components. Now, it does some really cool stuff these days, such as not only does it read what's going on in the face, it can also tell you what's going on with your heart rate. So some really awesome stuff there. But it will allow for us to look for specific movements in the face that are connected with pleasantness and implications, and potentially bring in the idea that the social signaling that might be going on would be reflected in this. So with that said, I know I've gone over my time. Oh, I'm at 30 minutes. I'll stop right here. I can talk about future implications if you guys want me to, but I think what's important is understanding that observable audience response affects us. There's a long literature that goes back over, I think, 70, 80 years looking at laugh tracks. Social signals from our face are very important because it affects other people. And that's certainly a discussion that I'd love to have with Heath and Bert, is about that, what's going on with the zygomaticus and with the corrugator muscle. And I think that the key thing is understanding that there's this research that is being done in the Hot Politics lab is so important because it's connecting the affect with the top-down signaling. And it's at this point, this meeting point, which I think is this nexus of knowledge where we can make the most movement forward for understanding politics and how to do a better job of being better people. So that's it for me. Okay.
Thank you, Patrick. This was a great presentation. I want to thank you for the open and honest reflection on the whole process, and I also it's humbling to hear somebody talk about some of our work so much, which we hope it's fun to hear that you see value in it. And I think we and I speak also for Gijs and for Matthijs, also value a lot of your work, and I think this work on audience responses is something that I haven't seen being used in to apply to politics, and I find it really fascinating how this works. I have just a question for clarification. Could you explain a little bit better what these dependent variables exactly were? Like, what are these concepts that you measure? Because some of it wasn't entirely clear to me what the outcome variables were in some of these models.
Okay, and I apologize for rushing through that. What we did is we had the participants evaluate how the speaker themselves was feeling in terms of these different variables there. So it's one of the things that with my experience is that you might not have the interoception to say, I'm feeling this, but because we're social creatures, we do a much better job of observing and predicting what other people will do, because we rely on other people socially. So that was the basis for that. And it builds to a certain extent off of the research that Marcelo Mortillaro and Mark Mayhew did, but we added on more scales to reflect all the different levels. And I thought I was doing really well until yesterday, when I pulled down a research paper where they have, it's from the University of Geneva, where they have multiple measures. And I haven't been able to go through it, but it's like 38 questions that break down what's going on. And they looked at, it was an fMRI study, so it's very involved. And it's like, oh, well, okay, someone's already done the work. I guess Carl and I are going to have a discussion before we go back and do this study again. So.
Yes, I should also say to the people in the audience that you can type your questions for Patrick in the Q&A box. So Patrick, could you explain a little bit more what the role of sort of the response, so the respondents, they might affiliate with the politician or not. It might be part of his or her in-party or out-party. And so you add a linear control for ideology, you find pretty big ideology effects, but would it be another way of thinking about this, is that actually the response to the in and out party politician colors your perception of the role of the audience responses fundamentally? So I'm thinking, I'm not sure if there's power for it, but I'm thinking more in terms of an interaction than sort of factoring out level differences between liberals and conservatives.
I'm not sure. I think that I ran an interaction and it didn't seem to work very well. It was just like some data dredging. So I think it was mainly a linear effect. But you're right, it's a challenge that Carl and I have had working across different cultures using, certainly we share a language, although I think the people from the United Kingdom would say that we don't do it as well. But there are the differences as far as what's the in-group versus the out-group. Certainly doing the United Kingdom versus the United States, that was an attempt to control that. And we saw some differences and how strongly people responded to Farage and to Biden. But I think that's really the big challenge as far as what you're talking about is, can you capture the in-group, out-group? And there has been some really great work done by social identity theorists. And of course, their names escape me. They've done incredible research on this. They have a book on it. I'll probably remember as soon as we are off the video. But there has been some work looking at social identity and how humorous people see someone, a comedian or otherwise, is. So I hope that answered the question. If not, I hope I danced around it in a nice manner.
No, I think it makes sense. Gijs, you had another question.
Yeah, a follow-up question on the dependent variables. I mean, I can see how most of them would work in a question format, but the goal expectancy, I find, how should I see that question? Are you asking people about if this meets their goals?
If it meets the leader's goals, yeah.
Yeah. But it's a pretty hard question. That's
It is, and that's always the challenge when you're trying to come up with new measures to approach this. It's so much easier, and that's why I think that the work that y'all are doing is probably a much better approach. And then seeing this new questionnaire and how they're approaching it, I've only had probably about 15 minutes to look through it, but I think it'll address a lot of the issues that the flaws, especially Carl and I, while we do research in this area, we're not psychometricians, and we try to do our best by relying upon other people's research. And even then, we're still dealing with the idea of granularity, which I think you talk about, which is how does an individual appreciate this information? And emotion, that's been the biggest challenge for me. It's that, what is anger? And anger is a lot of different things. Happiness is a lot of different things. And I think that's the huge challenge that we're all dealing with. And I think, was it Louise Barrett that you cite in your work? She's done some incredible work talking about interoception and how it affects the physiological response. So, I also hope I have danced around that question effectively. But you're right, it is a flawed measure.
There's a question from Ozan Osgur Oktay. What do you think about the age effect? If participants would be older, would you think the results would change? Would that change the results? Because politics are. Wait, let me rephrase this completely. I'm sorry, this is not the question word. It's just What do you think about age effects? If participants would be older, would you think that results would change as a result? Because politicians are also very related to age and generations.
Yeah, actually, I like the way you put it, and I'll go ahead and answer as how I hear it. So it's pretty awesome. I think I understand what's the question here is that laughter is something that over the lifespan we laugh less and less. It's important to, and one of the things that, if you look behind me, you see that I've got a small daughter, and I know that a lot of us have children at home, and we have our children that will come after us and say, tickle me, tickle me. No, don't tickle me. And within the social brain hypothesis of, the social brain hypothesis, what we have is the idea that we moved into being humans from grooming with fingertips, with tickle, to laughter, which laughter brought other people into the game. Now, the effect of laughter changes with the greater security that we have and the older we get. Well, a study that we did that's published in Frontiers in Psychology looked at undergraduates while they were watching the debates between Trump and Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And one of the things that we noticed these were college kids, and they laughed a lot. It was highly contagious. The emotional, first of all, the mimicry was there, and then there was also the emotional contagion. As you get older, I found that my sense of humor, I laugh a lot, but not as much as I did when I was younger. Of course, my daughter is making me laugh more because of the tickling. And she is essentially, what she's doing, okay, I'm going to go ahead and step out here and say my crazy thoughts. She is the basis for politics. Our children are the basis for politics. Because what they're doing is, by tickling me, she's bringing in the male. She knows she's got my wife to do stuff for her. But by bringing me in to the process, she's being very political and getting me involved socially with her caregiving. And when we laugh, it brings other people in through its contagiousness. So for me, this is where we have the very roots of politics, is with laughter. Now, applause uses something else differently because it's using the hands. Booing is another vocalization, but it's laughter, I think, and this is where the social brain hypothesis and Robin Dunbar, that's it. Robin Dunbar's research on this suggests that this is highly important, and tickle is where it all started. So I hope I responded to the question, but elaborated it on a way that was much more fun for all of us as we go and see our families and maybe tickle our children.
Thanks, Patrick. I always, now that I have to smile, I think whether or not you're evaluating whether it's sincere or not. Or, anyways.
You got a job draw. It's working.
There's a question from Matthijs Roduin. In your discussion of problems, you mentioned stimuli appropriateness. So laughing, applauding in times of COVID-19, audience presence itself. But I was wondering, to what extent might the source of the video play a role? The CNN logo was pretty present, right? Could it be the case that this had affected us as a result? Just a little disclaimer, Patrick, this has been a question that has been haunting us for years with the Hot Politics paper, where we also had a source cue in one of the conditions. So Matthijs is now asking you the exact same question.
Well, I think the thing is it's held constant. That's the one good thing, it's held constant. But you're right. If you're a Fox News person, if you see that, it's going to affect you. It's going to bias you. And certainly these are, I wouldn't call them subliminal. They might be preconscious cues that influence our appraisal of the situation. But I can't afford actors. I think you guys used actors within, Matthias, within your study there. Is that correct? We can't afford them. So we do our video editing, we could black it out, but it takes out a level of verisimilitude, which I think is also a challenge you brought up previously with your discussions, I think last week, is as political scientists, we're doing conceptual replications of pretty darn near everything because nothing stays exactly the same. And that's what makes us, well, we've got job security, I think, because nothing's going to stay the same. There's always new questions and always new things that will have an impact there. 10, 15 years ago, CNN logo probably not an issue. Nowadays, huge issue. So Matthias, hey, yeah, you're right. It probably did have an impact. Can I parse it out? Only by keeping it as a constant. Sorry.
Oh, you're right. Okay, the next question is from Isabella Ribasso. Hi, Patrick. Thanks a lot for this talk. Super fascinating. I apologize if I simply missed this, but was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the theoretical mechanism of the treatment. Does laughter, for instance, influence blessedness through emotional contagion, which influences subsequent appraisals, almost like incidental emotion induction? Or are these quite cognitive appraisals, i.e. people like my in-party candidate, which is goal congruent, and so on?
Oh, that is an awesome question. Thank you. That's why I want to get facial expression analysis going. I think with the research out there considering laughter suggests that there's a high level of mimicry, first of all, and then this leads to the emotional contagion that follows with the cognitive shifts that result. The study that we did that I refer to with Frontiers in Psychology, we saw with it was a dial testing that was done at Texas Tech University by Eric Busey and Harrison Gong. What they found is that laughter did not change people's response and liking of the candidates so much as applause did, which suggested that there may have been a more cognitive element to it. However, the feeling of connection with individuals over a period of time, whether through laughter or applause or singing, which that's one of the things that Robin Dunbar talks about, is the role of singing. It does play a role in bringing people together. And ultimately, when you bring people together, the social identity might lead to attitude change just because you belong to that group. So I think that's where we start getting into the feedback loops, and we're going from the micro level to a little bit more of the macro level, which is, it's fascinating, but it's exceedingly difficult to get to. It's like getting at what exactly is funny, what exactly is humor. And I hope I've answered the question, and if not, I'll certainly go ahead and elaborate more.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's it's an important topic, Patrick. The next question is from Maaike Holman. Hi, Patrick. Thanks for your talk. Great research. Very interesting that you're using this CPM model. I was wondering how you think this model is an improvement compared to these more traditional models, and where you see this model going in political science, political psychology research.
Well, I think that the research that you're doing, Maaike, is the sort of thing it's incredible, it's important, because it's a step, and I think it's an important step bringing the physiological together with these appraisals. And I think you're using a couple of indicators of appraisal, which, because there are fewer of them, it might be better than what Carl and I are doing, because there's so much information you have to process. We might be dealing with fatigue, whereas you're not dealing with it because you're using Occam's razor and reflecting specifically on that item. So I think that in reference to your research, I think that that's how I would see it. But I also say that this larger model, this elaboration, because of the research that's being done at the University of Geneva, and I highly suggest starting to look into the research. It's been occurring for about the past 25, 30 years. And they've been elaborating out on this for a very long period of time. And so I think it's getting to the more granular level, which will help us understand what is going on with individuals. And I don't know, Bert, do you mind if I go ahead and maybe making a kind of move to y'all's research? Because I think this is where we have this intersection of research. Okay, so one of the things that's fascinating for me is it's the behavioral ecology model of Fridland and Crivelli, I think it is. And what they argue is that when you're in a social situation, you tend to make more facial displays, especially if they're looking at smiles. So I want you guys to think about when you're reading a book or maybe you're watching a television program and there's no one in the house, how often you laugh. Now, put someone in that house. And I know that I do a lot of performative laughing or performative sighing when my wife's there, when my daughter's there. And so this shows up in the zygomaticus. And I think that's a part of the challenge with the study that you did, is the zygomaticus is a little bit more labile. When you're looking at something whereas the corrugator, it's not as much under control there, but I think that's where where we start looking at the componential processing model, is that there are different levels at which we would expect facial movements. And you're measuring it at the microvolt level, which is incredible, but it's also a little bit intrusive. But at the same time, you guys are going out into the field, which I gotta say is awesome. When I heard that you went to that biker rally, that's like, oh, damn, come to Arkansas. We've got lots of bikers in September, and I'm sure they'd love to have things stuck on their face. So the things that you've done by going out into the field says, okay, we can go ahead, look at this, but also the recognition that there might be social interaction that does play a role. And even with these Zoom sessions, now, Isabella, Micah, all y'all who have been asking these questions, I'm imagining you being there. I don't know your facial displays. I'm very responsive. I'm glad that Carl, Bert, Christiane is not showing up for some reason. I don't know. It's a big W, it looks like. It's probably off somewhere. I'm getting this feedback. So this means I'm smiling a whole heck of a lot more. Because it's a social event. And so that's one of the things that we might consider when we do these studies. Are we present with them? Do they have a feeling of being out there socially with others, so they have to signal different behavior? And that has feedback into the physiology because they're trying to affect other people. Because I've moved across multiple different cultures, my smile is my Swiss Army knife. And that's kind of a pun because it's the Geneva school that does a lot of work there, but also it's the multi-purpose tool that helps me, first of all, modify my own internal states, but also affect others around me. So I'm a very happy person because of the fact that I like making other people happy myself to get along with them. So anyhow, getting back to componential processing model, being aware of all these different steps will make us better scientists, will have us have more precise hypotheses and push that boundary of knowledge. And that's why I think it's important. That's why I think that the research that y'all are doing, or actually, because I can only see two of you, I'm going to do an Arkansas thing. You can all pick it up if you, all y'all, which is the most redundant statement ever, but all y'all are doing some great research because it helps us interact with each other and be better, more empathetic people.
Thanks, Patrick. This is excellent. Christian just informed us that his camera dropped. That's why I turned off his camera. So it's he wants to smile, but he's sending them through the digital space.
Okay. Well, it kind of looks a little bit like a smile.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, Patrick, I was wondering if we think about the role of the smile, then if you look at sort of applying this model and or just broaden the smile to applications in political science, political psychology, what sort of questions do you then see that are sort of unanswered? So one of the things that Gijs and I have been reading in the past is a little bit of this work by Randall Collins on sort of emotional energy. And as a sociologist, sort of this idea that maybe it's this positive effect that creates as a way of signaling positive energy, creating connections. Is that a way where we should be studying things like the smile, or in terms of maybe things like canvassing, or in other places where there's interaction in politics?
Well, I think I'll go back to Roger Masters. Roger Masters, I can't say enough good things about him. He's one of the founders of Association for Politics and Lifestyle. Hey, there's Christian. He was talking about that he saw Barack Obama, and Barack Obama, I did a study, the political psychology study, has one of these really powerful smiles, incredibly powerful smiles. He's talking about that he was up in New Hampshire when he visited, and he said that there was a palpable, almost felt like an electrical field around him. Now, we don't have the ability to measure that information yet. And that's where I think that is the next stage for political scientists, is we have these smartwatches, we have, you know, a variety of different ability to capture physiological data. Of course, there are a lot of concerns about that, but we might be able to get at that interaction a little bit better. Now, going to where I think, you know, the research for me is most fascinating with smiles, with that Barack Obama study, one of the things that was a fairly small sample, white people and black people and, you know, people of, of physiologically they're darker hued, I think it's probably visible minorities. I think there's different ways of putting in different nations. They responded differently, not on the positive signal, but those who were white/Caucasian, self-identified, saw more anger in the smiles, significantly more anger than those who were of, you know, visible minorities that we, you know, kind of combined for statistical power. So what's going on there with the appraisal based upon the physiology might play a role. Also, one of the things that I did notice is one of the terms that really grinds my gears, I think is a term that I can use, is the idea of smirks. When people say that person's smirking, I can't code a smirk. A smirk is something, our interpretation of what's going on. And so with that debate, the debates that we had, Joe Biden, some people saw smiling, other people saw smirking. Because smiles are so multi-purpose, the question is, what are the individual differences in the perceptions? So I'm not sure if that responds to the question. Does it? Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, and there's another question from Nasser, and it goes back into a bit to the methods. It says, in the structure of the study, you've talked about long questions and that those long questions are harder to do online. Nasser wonders how so.
I know, sorry. I think the thing is, it's not necessarily the questions themselves, but the time in the study, because we put a 15-minute time limit on it. It's the sort of thing, when you're dealing with being at a computer, you might step away from the computer for a little bit. You lose track of what's going on. So I think the important thing is have very short studies with short clips, because I think that we're dealing with an economy that's not just a financial economy. It's an attention economy. So I think that's one of the key things that we're looking at now. So it's not just the cognitive aspects of understanding things, but also how long someone is going to focus on an item when there's so many different things competing for time. Now I know that my daughter has my time in the morning, but Fridays, it's hot politics for me. So there's no competition there. As long as I can get you, I'm watching you all. But that's 1 hour, and that is a big chunk of my time, especially with children. You guys know that. And so that's what we're dealing with, is how do we reach out to the people that we want to find out information from, but also we want to teach, and how to do it best, but also how to do it cheaply, because we're social scientists. People aren't loading us up with money, and we're, all of us who are academics, looking at a financial shortfall. So finding best practices that also gives back to the public is something that, well, I think we need to focus on.
Thanks, Patrick, for this great talk. We've already reached the end of today's lab meeting. Both you and Carl will get a Hot Politics Lab coffee mug, of course, maybe somewhere in 2021, 2022. They're all in my office, so I don't have access to them. And of course, I want to give the coffee mugs personally to you. I really enjoyed your talk today. Learn a lot about research, also about parenting. That's an unexpected additional benefit today. I hope to see you next week, Patrick, and also you, Carl, because we'll be talking about facial mimicking next week. Micah Homan will give a presentation. It's the last Friday of the month. Well, not really, but the last Friday of the academic month, let's put it this way. And so it's Graduate Friday again. We have a presentation by Micah Homan and Kang Zenkis, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, from Temple University, with a talk titled The Role of Self-Conscious Emotions in Effective Polarization. Same time, same channel. We will also have our program now for 2021 online. There will be January 8th, we'll commence the year with a talk by Jif Lelkes from Annenberg School of Communication, University of Pennsylvania. The week after, we'll have a talk with Ursula Daxiker from the University of Amsterdam. We have Leor Smikrot, probably January 22 from Cambridge. And then again, Graduate Friday with Tristan Klingelhover and Lynn Andrea Fick. We're gradually updating the website. I see currently it goes, oh, I don't see how far it goes. But okay, we have most of the talks for the spring already online. And I should add, Bert and I have a special Hot Politics Lab end of the year podcast made for you with all the highlights. We discuss all the highlights of last year. It may not seem like 2020 had a lot of highlights, mostly, but luckily in the Hot Politics Lab, we had many highlights. So I'm pretty sure most of you will be completely bored over the Christmas break. So Bert and I recorded an hour of stand-up comedy for you about political science. Thanks, everyone, and I hope to see you next week.